Okay, last week I introduced our subject. A few of you weren't here, but we're looking at the map. And last week we talked about the importance of understanding salvation as a journey. And seeing the journey in terms of the map that goes from Exodus, across the Red Sea, through the Sinai Peninsula, to the Jordan River, across the Jordan, into the land of promise. So we're on that journey. I don't know how many stops we're going to make, but it's going to be, I think, 15 or 20. We'll see. But we're hopefully going to end at the Battle of Jericho. I want to get into Canaan and realize that though God had said it's a land of rest, what an interesting word to use, rest. That's the word he uses. When you get there, you discover there's battles to fight, there's crops to plant, there's cities to build. That doesn't look like rest, but my yoke is easy, my burden is light. It's different when you're in Canaan. Okay? So that's where we're headed. Before anyone starts on a journey, there must first be a reason to begin. You see where we are? We're filling in the blanks. A reason to begin. If we are content where we are, why leave to go somewhere else? Unless the reasons for leaving are greater than the reasons for staying, we will never even begin the journey. So tonight we're going to talk about Egypt, where the journey begins. Anybody know how long? Well, let me just, So the question is, why would I want to leave Egypt? Now, Egypt gets a lot of bad press. A lot of times we think of Egypt like a Nazi concentration camp. Don't think of it that way. It became a bad place. But for most of their stay in Egypt, this was the ruling empire of the day. The pyramids in Moses' day, if my math is right, anybody want to guess how old the pyramids were when Moses was alive? About 1,000. They were about 1,000 years old when Moses was alive. I mean, this was a great, great culture. Why would you want to leave Egypt and go off on some quest for who knows what? And so you got to answer, why would anybody in their right mind want to leave Egypt? Okay? Let me tell you a story about the eagle that was raised on a turkey farm. Do you know this story? This is a Tony Evans story. It's one of my favorites, and if you've heard me tell it, you'll hear it again. So somehow, don't ask how it happened, but an eagle egg ended up on a turkey farm. The egg hatched, the little eaglet came out, started looking around at all the turkeys, and he started to walk like a turkey. He started to talk like gobble like a turkey. He ate turkey food. He smelled like a turkey. And for all practical purposes, his only observation was, I'm obviously a turkey. There were times when he would see his reflection in the water and sort of wonder, is that really my identity? But again, he said, I walk like a turkey, I talk like a turkey, I smell like a turkey, I'm a turkey. If you know Tony Evans, you need to be in a black church to make this really work. It's really got preaching value. One day, a real eagle was flying overhead, looked down on the turkey farm and saw an eagle hanging out with turkeys. So the eagle swooped down and said to the eaglet, what are you doing in a place like this? And the eaglet said, well, I'm hanging out with my family, the turkeys. And the eagle, circling overhead, said, somebody has lied to you. You're no turkey. Stretch out those wings. And the eaglet had always known he had these appendages that he didn't quite know what to do with. But at the encouragement, he started flapping those wings, and he realized he was beginning to lift out of the turkey yard. And so when anybody leaves the turkey yard, all the other turkeys get really upset. This is just how it works on turkey farms. And so the turkeys say to this eaglet, beginning to rise out of the turkey yard, "What do you think you're doing?" And he said, "I am going to be what God created me to be. See you later, you turkeys." That is the best way I know how to introduce Hebrews living in Egypt, with no disrespect to the Egyptians by comparing them to a turkey farm, but the illustration works. They live in Egypt. I'm sure they spoke Egyptian, ate Egyptian, walked Egyptian. They probably smelled like Egyptians. But God's people are not Egyptians. So what are we going to do with that? This is where the story begins. A little history. When the book of Exodus opens, Israel had been living in Egypt almost, anybody know? How many years? 400 years. When did the Pilgrims land on Plymouth Rock? How many years ago was it? Yeah, it's about the same time. 1620. 1620 was Plymouth Rock. So roughly 4 centuries ago. Can you imagine any one of us who living 400 years into that story saying, we're not Americans. We don't, but we've just lived here since our fathers came on Plymouth Rock, but we're not Americans. I mean, it's like, that's a long time. When the book of Exodus opens, Israel had been living in Egypt almost 400 years. For much of this time, they were not slaves, and life was pleasant. Goshen, where they lived, was the Delta area, was a fertile area. Egypt was prosperous, stable, and culturally advanced. Yet the Hebrews never assimilated. This is one of the great immigration debates today. What do you do when immigrants don't assimilate? Part of me says, well, don't let them in the first place. If you don't want to be a part of the American culture, stay in your own culture. I don't know how God feels about my attitude, but I look at the Hebrews, and though they had been in Egypt on the turkey farm 400 years, they weren't Egyptians. They were Hebrews. And think of the Jews you know. Jews don't assimilate. They're always Jew. If they're true to their roots, they're going to celebrate Sabbath. They're going to not eat barbecue and hot dogs. They're going to do things that just remind us they're not one of us, really. What do you do with that? And what's the theological meaning of that? Oh Lord, you know, if heaven's not my home, where is my home? And if you love this world, you'll never start on the journey because you're already home. Why would you want to leave home? If you're a turkey and you want to stay on the turkey farm, if some eagle says, I want to tell you of a land that is fairer than day, and by faith you can see it afar. What land? I don't see it. But our grandparents sang all those songs. Okay. The Hebrews never assimilated into Egyptian culture. Why? We must look to their original calling to find the answer. Genesis 12. Very important words in human history. When God found a man named Abram, also known as Abraham. Now the Lord said to Abram, go. Interesting, first word. You may be from Ur of the Chaldees. You may even think Ur of the Chaldees is your home. That's not your home. And I think Abraham said, I thought it was. No. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land. Where is my place? Ever since the Garden of Eden, we're looking for our place, our home, our country. that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. Who are my people? There's a lady friend that works at the seminary. She's actually about like my fifth cousin, Jessica Avery. I don't know if any of you know Jessica. She's a sweetheart. But she's always talking about, when she talks about a church or a group, she'll say, those are my kind of people, my kind of people. Or Stan, those are our kind of people. I love that but it touches something, because who are my kind of people? I'm always looking for them. And sometimes they're not your biological kin. Sometimes you're with your biological kind of people and you're saying, they're not really my people. And I'm looking for a place. I'm looking for a people. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. In other words, Abram, I'm not calling you because I want to bless you. I'm calling you because I want to bless the nations through you. How odd of God to choose the Jews. I love that poem. I still don't know who wrote it. I didn't. But what an odd story. Abram. So there's a place, there's a people, and there's a mission. You're to bless the nations, including Egypt. Never think that God doesn't love turkeys and Egyptians. That's part of why he called the Hebrews out. He wants to save the Egyptians. We'll see that as we get in the story. So, God's people are different. They are recognizable because of three fundamental realities. One, home. This is the place part. Ever since Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden, the people of God have been characterized by homesickness. Do you remember Cain lived east of Eden in Genesis 4 in the land of, I'll be impressed if somebody remembers the name of the land that Cain lived in. Nod. The land of Nod. And if you look in Genesis 4 at the footnote, the word Nod, I'll be really impressed if you remember what Nod means. It means wandering. And that's human history. We're trying to get home. I live somewhere east of Eden. That's so powerful. If you could write hymns and poetry, talk about being east of Eden. And I'm trying to find the doorway home. I know I'm not home. And I know I'm not with my people. There's a homesickness in me. This is all setting us up for Egypt. And if you read the Iliad and the Odyssey of all things, these are not Christian books, but it's the same kind. There's a yearning in us. The Wizard of Oz. It's a journey trying to get back to Kansas. Lord of the Rings, trying to get back to the Shire. I could say more. Got to keep going. Okay, so home. They are wanderers trying to find their place, their land. The blank there, where do I belong? That's the question. Where do I belong? And if you don't have that question in you, you're not going to start this journey. If you say, I am where I belong. I'm a turkey on a turkey farm. Well, God bless you. Stay where you are. God is looking for eagles whom he's called to soar. Okay, second part of God's people is their identity. Though the Hebrews lived in Egypt, walked, talked, ate, and smelled like Egyptians, they're not Egyptians. The blank there is, who am I? I've been here 400 years, but I'm not Egyptian, and I know it. Number 3 is purpose. Israel was called for a purpose, to be a blessing to the nations. The blank is, why am I here? I love this sermon that I'm preaching to you tonight, because this is right at the guts of what the human story is all about. Where do I belong? Who am I? And why am I here? Welcome to Egypt. Because that's where these questions, and if they're not burning in you, And they're one thing when you ask them when you're 16 years old. They're powerful at that age. But I'm 63. I'm still asking these, who are my people? Where's my home? I just, I don't want to wander here, but at this funeral, I went to Buddy Luce's funeral, Fort Valley, Georgia. Well, I grew up in South Georgia. That's home. So I go back to, and First Methodist Church, Fort Valley, Georgia, is like for me stepping back into an old slipper. It's like, this is my people. This is my place. But part of me says, no, it's not. It's really not. But it feels like it is. Anyway, that's when I'm driving south and when I start to see kudzu and when the dirt turns red and I start seeing boiled peanut signs. It's like, this is home. And then I stay there 2 or 3 days and I realize, no, it's not home. I love it. I love the people. But there's something in me that it's like, it works on you. Okay? A lot of you have stories like that. You like the kudzu story? That's true. Spiritually speaking, Egypt is a picture of this world. This world. I would be interested to know when anybody in this room last heard a sermon against the sin of worldliness. Anybody heard a sermon recently on worldliness? You have? Good.
I think it was included last Sunday at church.
Good. Well, it's one of those sins that's sort of gone out of fashion. And we sort of like this world and the things of this world. Listen to how Revelation says it. When the 2 witnesses have finished their testimony, the beast rises from the bottomless pit, will make war on them, conquer them, and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that symbolically is called Sodom and what? Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. What city is this? Their Lord was crucified there. That would be Jerusalem. But he calls it Sodom. He calls it Egypt. It's like, but Egypt is a metaphor of this world. And that's where God, just like Babylon in later biblical history, God's people are exiled in Babylon. But God said, build houses and settle down. You're going to be there, but don't assimilate. You are not Babylonians. But seek the peace of Babylon, but don't become Babylonian. It's a good thing when a boat is in water. It's a bad thing when water is in the boat. It's a good thing when Christians are in the world. It's a bad thing when the world is in Christians. It's a good thing when God's people are in Egypt. But when Egypt gets in God's people, and that's what the golden calf is all about. The golden calf is when the redeemed said, we're still thinking Egyptian. And God said, you can't get to Canaan if you've got an Egyptian mentality. It is impossible. And that's when they said, but we love the leeks and onions, not the milk and honey. This is powerful stuff. Let's turn the page. If you are in love with this world, then you have no reason to respond when Jesus says, follow me. As the Puritan pastor Thomas Brooks said, the world and you must part, or Christ and you will never meet. I love the Puritans. We need some of them among us. Okay, are we ready to go? That was longer introduction than I wanted. Why leave? God has a problem. How do you motivate, there's the blank, motivate people to leave a place they don't want to leave? The early chapters of Exodus describe how God orchestrated events so that the people actually wanted to leave where they had been living for 400 years. God used 4 ingredients to prompt His people to begin their journey toward Canaan. So this is my 4-point sermon, all right? What is it going to take to get you, just like it took to get the Hebrews, off of dead center and say, I don't like where I am. I want to go where God wants me to be. God's got 4 ways to do that, at least according to Egypt 1, 2, and 3. I've got a footnote there. I'm going to tell you what the 4 are in a minute, but notice that guilt is not one of the factors God uses to motivate the Hebrews to begin their journey. Though many evangelicals love to use the law and the guilt that comes to those who know they've broken it in an attempt to get people to say yes to Jesus Christ, God has a better way. In Exodus, the law doesn't even enter the picture until chapter 20. I just love this book. It's so good because we like to try to motivate people by saying you're a guilty sinner. And the law doesn't even, it's not even mentioned. It's not even on the screen at this point. It's not in the game. It's coming, but not to motivate us. When you motivate people by guilt, I think sometimes we produce Pharisees. And the church does not need any more Pharisees. There's plenty already there. So don't add to the problem. So, what are the 4 things that would motivate the people of God? I'll give you the answer on A. Pain. Pain. And let's read a little bit. So here's God's problem. God's people have been living 400 years in a nice place. Climate's good, economy's strong, government's stable, culture is rich, health plan is good, retirement benefits. Why would they want to leave Egypt? Let me read you the story. This is how the story begins. I'm going to start at verse 6 in chapter 1 of Exodus. Then Joseph died. Now you got to know the book of Exodus to know that story. Joseph came to Egypt with 70 Hebrews 400 years ago. And Pharaoh loved Joseph and buried him with honors. Joseph was a mega hero, but he died. And all of his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew strong so that the land was full of them. Sort of like rabbits. They just multiplied. And by the time they leave, there's going to be 2 million of them. That's pretty rapid multiplication, by the way. Verse 8. Now, there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Who's Joseph? And he said to his people, Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh the store cities of Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter. Remember the word bitter. It's an important word. When they celebrate Passover, one of the elements of the meal is bitter herbs, because I don't want you to forget how bitter it was on the turkey farm. It's not your home. And their first stop on the journey after they cross the Red Sea is the bitter place, Marah. The word bitter's important. And it's an important part of my journey. It's an important part of your journey. The things that define you are the bitter places. Okay. Made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field, and in all their work they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah. I love this verse. The most powerful man in the world, we don't know his name. We know his title. He was Pharaoh. I don't know what his name was. But we do know the names of two midwives, Puah and Shiphrah. Because the real heroes in this story is not the guy on the throne, it's not the guy in the Oval Office. That's just a footnote. The real stuff happening is down in levels of life where God is. And He's changing history through midwives. And we know their names, Shiphrah and Puah. When you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on their birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. And if it's a daughter, she shall live. And this is the first example of civil disobedience. This is what made Martin Luther King excited. Here's people who said, I'm going to disobey the king because the king is unjust. And I'll do it civilly. I'm not going to raise an army. I'm just going to not do what he tells me to do. But the midwives feared God and didn't do as the most powerful man in the world told them to do. But let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this? And let the male children live. And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They're vigorous and give birth before the midwife can get there. So God dealt well with the midwives and the people multiplied and grew strong. And because the midwives feared God, He gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews, you shall throw to the crocodiles. Throw them in the Nile. But let the daughters live. So pain. So to encourage God's people to say, maybe life on the turkey farm is not so good after all, God just sort of turns up the heat and say, let me just let you feel a little pain. Number one, God permits circumstances in Egypt to become worse and worse. A new king, cruel taskmasters, babies killed. We're going to see in the next few chapters, they make bricks without straw. Go gather your own straw. It just gets worse and worse and worse. No one begins this journey until the pain of staying where we are becomes greater than the pain of moving to where God wants us to be. That's such a good statement, I'm going to say it again. No one begins this journey until the pain of staying hurts worse than the pain of leaving. I've got some nodding heads that are just saying, I think I know what you're talking about. Dr. Paul Brand was a medical missionary in India, a true saint of God. He's in heaven now, and he worked with leprosy patients. Worked with leprosy patients in India. Leprosy destroys the body's ability to sense pain. And in the book I'm quoting from, he says, you'd think that, how wonderful. Man, maybe we all ought to get leprosy, because if you get leprosy, then you don't hurt in your body, because leprosy destroys pain sensors. This is not a good thing. Quote, Paul Brand, silencing pain without considering its message is like disconnecting a ringing fire alarm to avoid receiving bad news. Brand calls pain the gift nobody wants. In fact, that's the name of his book, Pain, the Gift Nobody Wants. It's a great book. And he takes the spiritual applications from studying lepers, because when you don't feel pain in your hand, you can throw your hand over in the fire during the night, and you wake up in the morning and your finger's burned off and you didn't feel it. Or you can get a grain of sand in the eye and not know it and go blind before you realize there's a grain of sand in my eye. That's not a good thing. It doesn't hurt, but pain is God's gift. And in Egypt, Hebrews, this is God's gift. That your nice leisurely life was turned to slavery. It doesn't feel pleasant, but God is about to give you a land of milk and honey. You don't want to stay in Egypt. You're not Egyptians. You're not turkeys. It's a gift. You know this quote of C.S. Lewis, number 3, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. Pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. That's from the book, The Problem of Pain. C.S. Lewis understood this. Number 4, the problem with the so-called prosperity gospel is that it has no theology of suffering. I do not know how anybody can have an understanding of the gospel that doesn't understand suffering, when the very symbol of our faith is a cross. I mean, what part of the cross do you not understand? Crosses hurt, but crosses redeem the world. Really? It's like, I'm still trying to absorb that. I know that's true, though. I do know it's true. I just don't like it. I still don't like it, and I still kick and scream because it hurts to hurt. Number 5, this is Scripture, chapter 2. And the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, and they cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning. The verbs are important. God remembered His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. I just love the way the ESV says it. God knew. God knows. He knows about the bricks without straw. He knows about the babies thrown in the Nile. You may think He's not paying attention. He's watching everything. He hears your cry. Number 6, just a verse from the New Testament. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. And the word fruit there is a Canaan word. Things grow when you get to Canaan. It's a land of milk and honey. Things grow. And we'll understand it better by and by. There's another old song, by and by, when the morning comes, we'll see it. It'll make sense. When you're in it, it just hurts. But God's doing something, and He's trying to motivate us to leave the turkey farm. Okay? Pain. Number 2, a confused identity. Confused identity. When I was at this funeral at the reception, this is Saturday, I was talking to somebody here, and there was a lady with her back to me sitting here at a table, and I don't know what I was saying, but I was telling sort of who I was to somebody, and she jumped up, turned around, said, Stanley Key? And she said, I'm Maylou Darcy. We were in high school together in Albany, Georgia. And it's like, she said, don't you remember me? And I didn't. I couldn't remember her, sort of, vaguely. But she remembered me. But as we talked, we started sharing all these names this is the chapter of my life that not even Katie knows. My wife. This is pre-everything. And I said, Maylou, when I think of those years at Westover High School, I said, those weren't good years. I said, I was so self-absorbed. That's the word I used. I said, it was all about me. And she smiled as if to say, we all knew that. It was obvious. But it made me think, who am I? Am I that person? Who was that 18-year-old in Westover High School? Okay, let's read a little bit. So, to leave Egypt, God's going to let you be confused about who you are. Who am I? Am I Egyptian or am I Hebrew? Let me read some of this story. Chapter 2 begins in verse 1. This is when Moses' mother, Moses is born, and she puts him in a basket and floats him in the river. And he floats down the river, and verse 9, and Pharaoh's daughter takes this child away, and she becomes his mother. So, think about this. Moses, the hero of this story, has a biological mother who's Hebrew, has an adoptive mother who's Egyptian. He is your classic third culture kid. TCK. He is the poster child. And he grows up saying, who am I? Because when I'm with the Egyptians, they all look at me like, you're a Jew. But when I go to the Jews, they all look at me like saying, you're not one of us. And Moses is just ripped apart. And it reaches its pinnacle. And I'm looking at, Patricia, I'm so glad you're here because you work with third culture kids, as does our daughter. What's that? And you, yes, you are one. A TCK. There's a whole literature on this. Betty Krause will know this too. Missionaries, our children grew up third culture kids in France. So they would go to French schools, and they were weird and strange because they were the American kids. They would come home to Wilmore for a year and go to Wilmore Elementary School, and they were the odd kids who didn't fit in. They didn't know. My daughter came home from school in elementary, said, Daddy, what's the Pledge of Allegiance? And I said, oh my goodness. My kids don't know the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I remember that happening. Is that right? Yeah. So angry at my mother. Yeah. Well, this illustrates so powerfully what it means to lead Egypt. Who am I? And it's a painful discovery, especially when you're like Moses. And this is how it painfully got for Moses. Look at verse 11. One day, chapter 2, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people, meaning the Jews, and looked on their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? And he answered, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Who died and made you king, Mr. Moses? Who do you think you are? And I think Moses would have said, well, I'm a Hebrew. And it's like they said, no, you're not. And you know you're not. You're an Egyptian. Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, surely the thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of it, he thought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian. And incidentally, he was there for 40 years, thinking about, who am I? Am I Hebrew? Am I Egyptian? I'm just going to leave a plague on both your houses. I'm just going to go live with sheep. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water. That's a great story, but let's skip down to verse 21. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and Moses named his kid what? Gershom. What's the footnote say? I like the footnote that says the alien. He named his kid the alien, or the stranger, or the sojourner, which is like he named his kid what he was going through. I don't know who I am. I'm living out here in the desert. I can't live in Egypt. I can't live with the Hebrews. Powerful. Okay, so a confused identity. We got to go quickly. For the people, they live in Egypt, but they're not Egyptians. So who are we? For Moses, he's the classic TCK, third culture kid. He has a birth mother who's Jewish, an adoptive mother who's Egyptian. When he's with the Hebrews, he feels like a foreigner, as he does when he's with the Egyptians. He names his son Gershon, the alien. Who am I? Number 3, Moses addresses his inner pain and search for identity by taking matters into his own hands. He murders an Egyptian. This only makes matters worse because we don't find ourselves by looking for ourselves. We find ourselves when we lose ourselves. A fellow named Jesus said that. I grew up in the hippie era, and I can still remember people, that would go off, I'm going to find myself. It's so funny to think about. And they were sincere, and I was sort of one of them too. I was like, but people that try to find themselves never do. Because you don't find yourself by looking for yourself. You find yourself by finding your Creator and losing yourself in your Creator. That's what's going to happen in the next chapter at the burning bush, when Moses discovers who Moses is, when he stands before his Creator, not when he looks in the mirror and says, who am I? This is such good stuff. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. On this thing on identity, maybe I'm just having nostalgia, but when I was in high school, I can remember like on a Friday evening when I was leaving the house to go out to be with my friends to do high school stuff that high schoolers do on the weekends. My dad would grab me and say, son, remember who you are and who you belong to. That could mess up your whole weekend. That's a great question. Who am I? And what he meant, there are certain things keys don't do. And you know it. And you're a key. Don't forget who you are. I often did forget who I was. But the point was still well made. And that's what God is telling his people in Egypt. Don't forget who you are. You're not Egyptians. And Moses, you're more than a Hebrew and you're more than an Egyptian. Your identity, you're not going to believe who you are. We're still talking about you 3,000 years later. Okay. Oh, I've got Do you know Les Mis, the musical? When Jean Valjean sings, who am I? I can't sing it for you, but if you don't know the story, you won't get the full impact. But he was a prisoner. He had been sent to prison, was it 19 years of hard labor because he stole a loaf of bread to feed hungry children. Bummer. That's a bum deal. And he had his tattoo, it was his prison number. Well, he finally gets out of prison and he becomes an honest man, thanks to the priest and the candlesticks, if you know the story. But Javert, this paragon of justice, the French police officer, is trying to track him down because he knows he can put him back in prison because he stole the candlesticks or whatever. But Jean Valjean becomes the mayor of a town. He's the owner of a factory. He's got all these people working for him, and he's just a good man. He's a good man. But there's a man that Javert arrests because he thinks he's Jean Valjean. He looks like Jean Valjean. And Jean Valjean has now got another name, living in peace, but he knows somebody is being tried because they think it's him, and he could be sent off to prison wrongly. So Jean Valjean has this dilemma. If I reveal myself, they'll lock me up, and all my workers will go unemployed. But if I say nothing, they're going to put that man away. So what am I supposed to do? And that's when he sings, who am I? And it'll rip your heart out. If I speak, I am condemned. If I stay silent, I am damned. Who am I? Can I condemn this man to slavery, pretend I do not feel his agony? This innocent who bears my face, who goes to judgment in my place. Who am I? Can I conceal myself forevermore, pretend I'm not the man I was before? And must my name until I die be no more than an alibi? Must I lie? How can I ever face my fellow man? How can I ever face myself again? My soul belongs to God, I know. I made that bargain long ago. He gave me hope when hope was gone. He gave me strength to journey on. Hear the journey there? Then he steps into the courtroom and he sings, who am I? Who am I? And then he says, I'm Jean Valjean. And he unbuttons his chest and he reveals his prison number, 24601. And so, Javert, you see it's true. That man bears no more guilt than you. Who am I? I'm 24601. Anyway, it's powerful. You got to see the movie to really do it. But it's this question. Who am I? Who am I? We're going to see in a moment. Well, let's see it right now. Let's read chapter 3. All right, we got 10 minutes. We're doing good. Maybe it'd be hard to say what is the most important scene in the whole Scripture, but this has got to be in the top 5. Moses at the burning bush. And if you've followed chapter 1 and 2, it comes into focus. Now Moses, and incidentally, Moses is 80 years old. So if you, just in case somebody's sitting here saying, it's too late for me to start that journey. No, it's not. No, it's not. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. This is Sinai. This is Mount Sinai. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. I love that he calls. Do a study sometime when God calls a person by his name twice. Or think about when you were little, when your mother would say, Stanley, Stanley. It was the second time. There's a whole study. Abraham, Abraham, take your son, your only son. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Here's one. Samuel, Samuel, in the temple when he had a dream. My favorite is when Jesus said, Martha, Martha. It's so tender. Martha. He didn't just say Martha. Martha, Martha. It's a great study. But here it is, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. And God said, don't come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is what? This is the Holy Land. We're not in Canaan. This is not part of the Canaan real estate, but this is Holy Land. This is wonderful news. You can't, it's holy because God is there. There is a Holy Land, but you're looking for a place, Moses, and don't just limit it to geography. If God is there, it's holy. It's home. If God is not there, even in Jerusalem, Jerusalem will be Ichabod. You remember in the book of Ezekiel when the glory leaves the temple? When God doesn't live in Jerusalem anymore? It's a good story. Verse 6, and he said, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I've surely seen, look again at the verbs, the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I've heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their suffering. I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I've also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I'll send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And Moses said to God, who am I? Lord, you got the wrong bush, Lord. My picture's still on all the post offices and the wanted poster back in Egypt. I don't know how to do deliverance. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. Who am I is the question. The answer is, I will be with you. It's like, does that answer the question? All right. Really, we're almost done. The third thing we need, if we're going to leave Egypt, the first thing was pain. Secondly, a confused identity. Who am I? The third thing we need is to cultivate new appetites or desires. God spoke of a land of milk and honey to people who lived in a land of leeks, onions, and garlics. And you're supposed to laugh because this is really an interesting story. Thus, the question becomes, would I rather have leeks and onions or milk and honey? In a sense, that's the only question on the table. That says everything right there. You'll stay on the turkey farm if what you want is leeks, if your appetite is for leeks and onions and garlic, which actually sounds sort of good. Milk and honey is a little sort of bland, seems to be. But again, cultivating appetite. There was a time in my life, if you'd given me a choice, Stan, would you rather go to McDonald's and eat a Big Mac and French fries and a chocolate milkshake, or would you rather go to Dakota Steakhouse and have a filet mignon? I would have said McDonald's. Any idiot wants to go to McDonald's, because my tastes had not been refined to realize those are not equivalent meals on any level. But that's what those who prefer leeks and onions to milk and honey. It's like, are you sure? God does not want to destroy our appetites and lusts. He wants to purify them. No one starts this journey who is not ravenously hungry for what God can provide. Number 2, the Bible is a food-driven book. Sin entered the world through food. So did salvation. I am the bread of life. Take and eat. This is my body. My flesh is real food. Jesus said, after he fed the 5,000, he said, my flesh is real food. It's all about your appetites. What are you hungry for? C.S. Lewis, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is I was made for another world. I'd love to say more. Number 4, but how to cultivate right desires and holy appetites? What if I prefer eating a donut to eating an apple? Which I usually do. Manna, we're going to see that in a few weeks. When they get in the desert, they eat manna, which has a sweet taste, but it's really rather bland. And I think what God is doing is cleansing their palate. You know, there's in some of the Chinese restaurants, they'll give you, what is it in Korea that they give you to cleanse your palate? Because I think that's ginger. Isn't it ginger? And I said, why do you eat ginger? And they said, well, it cleanses your palate so you can then get new tastes. And you get the full benefit. I don't know if I got, but I think manna sort of did that. It's like, let's get all that leeks and onions out of your system so that you have a ravenous hunger for the milk and honey of Canaan. Can you do that, God? Can you get my desires off this world and onto that world? God says, try me, try me. Eat some more manna. Manna is a bland food intended to cleanse the palate. Thomas Chalmers preached about the expulsive power of a new affection. Expulsive power. Expulsive. Expulse. Expulsive. I'll illustrate it this way. When some of you have heard me tell these stories, but when I was in college, I had a little hot pot in my room. I lived right down the hall from Gus. I had a little this was super cool. And I had instant coffee. And I could make myself, in my room, coffee. That was like cutting edge. That was so. Then one day, and I loved instant coffee. Then one day, I'm fast forwarding, I had a cup of Starbucks coffee. And I never drank instant coffee again. It's the expulsive power of a new affection. How do you deal with the temptations and the lusts that draw us? In Thomas Chalmers, a Scottish Presbyterian of 150 years ago, in his sermon, he said, you've got to find something that you're more passionate about than you are about the things of this world. So that just like Starbucks ruins instant coffee forever, not because you're doing anything to stop instant coffee, you just find something so much better. That's good. So, cultivating new appetite. Nobody leaves Egypt unless they're thirsty and hungry for milk and honey. And finally, we're done. D, there must be a call from God. First, the call came to Moses at the burning bush, but then the call came to all the people through Moses and the other events of the Exodus. Understanding the call of God, it's initiated by God. You don't just wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to leave Egypt. It doesn't work that way. You're a slave. You can't get out. God has to call you. Jesus said in John 15:6, you didn't choose me, I chose you. How odd of God to choose the Jews. Moses, you didn't choose to liberate your people, God chose you. Kicking and screaming, by the way. B, it's to a journey, not just to a destination. Let's do the walk. Let's walk together. Let's do life together. Let's have a relationship. C, to a relationship, more than to a task. D, to a team or a community. You're not alone. To Moses, God said, your brother Aaron is on his way here right now. And your sister Miriam, she's part of the team. And you've got others. There's a team. It's not good to be alone. And E, the call will cost you everything. Salvation is free, but it's not cheap. To leave the turkey farm will cost you everything. This is good stuff. Okay? So today, what we did, we talked about Egypt. And the challenge is, why would I want to start this journey? And I've humbly suggested there's 4 things God uses here. Pain. When you're hurting, you tend to ask the God question. Where's God? Identity. Who am I? 3, appetites. What am I hungry for? If what you want is leeks and onions, you'll stay on the turkey farm forever. What are you hungry for? And 5, has God called your name? Moses, Moses. Leave that farm. I got a land with your name on it and a people. But you got to follow. Lord, thank you. This is such good stuff. And it's just good to do it and to study it together. Keep working your word into us. Thank you for the men and women that are here tonight. And Lord, anything that we've learned that's from you, seal it into our hearts, we pray, and help us to apply it. In Jesus' name and for the sake of the kingdom, amen. Okay, next week we're going to get to hopefully across the Red Sea. So we're going to say, how do I get out of the turkey farm? I want to go. I'm willing to go, and I'll give you a hint, it takes blood and water. Nobody gets out without blood and water. All right? Good stuff.